Throughout modern history, there have been moments where governments acted in secrecy, decisions made behind closed doors, operations denied when questioned, and only revealed years later. In many of these cases, the truth didn't emerge all at once. It came slowly throughout documents, investigations, and sometimes accidents. Tonight, we examine several confirmed cases from outside of the United States, not as speculation, but as part of the historical record. This is the Dead Hour, the Cambridge Five. The story of the Cambridge Five begins in the 1930s at the University of Cambridge in England. At the time, Europe was politically unstable, fascism was rising, and ideological divisions were deepening. Within this environment, several students were quietly recruited by Soviet intelligence. These were not ordinary recruits. They were highly educated, well-connected, and positioned for future influence. Over the following decades, individuals like Kim Philby, Guy Burgess, and Donald MacLean entered key roles within British intelligence and diplomacy. Their positions gave them access to classified information they passed to the Soviet Union. For years, suspicions existed. There were intelligence leaks that couldn't be explained, operations that failed without clear reason. But internally, many resisted the idea that the breach could be so deep. The turning point came through a combination of signals, intelligence, and defection. Intercepted Soviet communications, part of what later became known as the Venona Project, suggested the presence of high-level spies. Then, in 1951, Burgess and MacLean abruptly defected to the Soviet Union. This confirmed that the threat was real. Further investigations eventually exposed additional members, including Philby, who fled in 1963. The scale of the damage became clearer over time. Operations were compromised, agents were exposed, Allied trust was weakened. What had once been dismissed as suspicion or internal paranoia was fully confirmed as one of the most significant intelligence penetrations of the 20th century. MK Ultra experiments in Canada. In Montreal, at the Allen Memorial Institute, patients arrived expecting care. Many were dealing with depression, anxiety, or other manageable conditions. Instead, some became subject in a series of experimental procedures led by psychiatrist Donald Wynne Cameron. Cameron believed the human mind could be reset. His methods involved breaking down existing mental patterns and attempting to rebuild them. To do this, patients were placed into drug-induced comas for extended periods. They were subjected to repeated electroconvulsive therapy, far beyond typical medical standards. In some cases, recorded messages were played to them for hours or days, a process known as psychic driving. At the time, these practices were not widely disclosed. Patients and families were often unaware of the true nature of the treatments. The truth began to surface years later. In the 1970s, investigative journalists and government inquiries uncovered documents linking these experiments to broader intelligence-funded research programs. Former patients came forward with testimonies. Many described memory loss, cognitive damage, and long-term psychological effects. Legal cases followed. Eventually, compensation was awarded to some victims. What had once been hidden within the walls of the hospital became a documented case of non-consensual human experimentation. Stasi Surveillance Program. In East Germany, the government maintained control not only through laws, but through observation. The Ministry for State Security, the Stasi, developed a system of surveillance that extended into nearly every aspect of daily life. At its height, the Stasi employed over 90,000 official staff and relied on hundreds of thousands of informants. These informants were not always obvious. They could be co-workers, neighbors, even close friends. Their task was to report behavior, conversations, and attitudes. Suspicions of surveillance was common. People spoke cautiously. Trust was limited, but few understood the full scale. That changed in 1989 as the Berlin Wall fell and the government control weakened. Citizens began occupying Stasi offices. Inside, they discovered vast archives, documents, recordings, photographs, detailed records of millions of individuals. The extent of the surveillance was far greater than most had imagined. Personal lives had been systematically recorded, relationships monitored, reputations manipulated. The conspiracy that the government was watching its own citizens on a massive scale was no longer a suspicion. It was a documented fact. Rainbow Warrior bombing. On July 10th, 1985, the Greenpeace vessel Rainbow Warrior was preparing for a mission. It was docked in Auckland, New Zealand, set to protest French nuclear testing in the Pacific. That night, 2 explosions tore through the ship. It sank shortly after. One crew member, photographer Fernando Pereira, was killed. Initial investigations focused on identifying those responsible. What followed was a detailed inquiry by New Zealand authorities. Evidence pointed toward foreign involvement. 2 individuals were arrested. They were later identified as operatives connected to French intelligence. Further investigation revealed that the operation had been authorized by the French government. The object was to prevent the protest. The admission confirmed what had initially seemed unlikely. A sovereign government had carried out a covert attack in another country to stop activism. The incident led to international backlash, diplomatic consequences, and long-term reputational damage. Russian apartment bombings. In 1999, a series of apartment bombings in Russia killed hundreds of people. The attacks were officially attributed to extremist groups and were used to justify military action. However, questions began to emerge. Journalists and independent investigators pointed to inconsistencies. One key event occurred in the city of Ryazan. Residents reported suspicious activity in a building. Authorities initially confirmed that the explosives had been found, but later officials stated that the incident was a training exercise. This explanation raised further questions. Why would such an exercise be conducted in a residential building without public knowledge? Why were initial reports inconsistent? Some former officials and analysts have argued that the full truth has not been revealed. While the official position remains unchanged, the controversy persists. This case illustrates how incomplete transparency can leave lasting uncertainty, even decades later. Unit 731. During World War II, the Imperial Japanese Army operated a covert program known as Unit 731. Its purpose was to study biological and chemical warfare. The methods involved human experimentation. Subjects, often prisoners, were exposed to diseases, extreme conditions, and invasive procedures. For years after the war, details of Unit 731 were limited. Information was fragmented, but over time, evidence emerged. Testimonies from former personnel, recovered documents, academic research. These sources confirmed the scope and nature of the program. Today, Unit 731 is recognized as one of the most severe violations of medical ethics in modern history. What had been once concealed is now part of the documented record. These cases vary in scale, context, and outcome, but they share a consistent pattern: secrecy, denial, and eventual exposure. Not all claims labeled as conspiracies are true, but some are, and understanding the difference requires evidence, time, and sometimes access to information that was never meant to be seen. History doesn't just record events, it reveals them.